Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and good night, as he says on the Truman Show. But yes, sorry for the late start. I was having Wi-Fi issues, but that's all dealt with now, and we can get into the show and start it. So this evening we'll be discussing Hugh Hefner and the magazine of Playboy. Playboy is possibly the most famous magazine that the world's ever seen. Certainly probably the biggest selling, and it's always had a image of glitz and glamour, and it's certainly been idealized in the media for a long, long time. It's only up until Hugh Hefner's death uh, in 2017 that this whole darker side has been exposed for the first time. So I hope you'll join with me and peeling back the curtain and looking through and seeing the dark side of Playboy. Something that I've been researching for a long time. So let's get into it. So to start it off with, we're going to have some background on Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner was born to a very strong puritanical family. His parents were both the children of immigrants in the United States. They were both raised rurally on farms, so he had that kind of background. He was brought up by strong, God-fearing Christians who, there was no mentions of sex or anything like that in his house. It was a very strict religious upbringing, and I think that maybe that could certainly have influenced him later on the line. But yeah, Hugh Hefner's early life was fairly normal. He never had a girlfriend up until the age of 26 when he got married. He never had any sex before marriage. He said this in interviews. And his first wife, he actually found out had cheated on him before they had been officially married, but were still together, and that broke him. And she, as a result of that, said that he was allowed to basically have an open marriage with her, and he did. And then that marriage fell apart, and he had another marriage where something similar happened again, and that fell apart. And I think at that point, something shifted inside of him, and he kind of said, right, I'm done with conventional relationships now. Because I think he made the big mistake of kind of generalizing women. Just because he'd had some bad experiences with them doesn't mean that all women are like that, you know what I mean? But I think in his head, he did make that conclusion. And saying all certain types of people or something is stupid, you know what I mean? And I think that that's the moment where Hefner's kind of misogyny, you know what I mean, was created. And from then on, I think that he vowed never to have a conventional relationship ever again. And I think that that's the root of him as a person, in the aspects of him that we're going to be discussing. And I think with Hefner, it's a very intricate and confusing kind of warren of pardon the pun, of mysteries and of multiple kind of conclusions to draw over the same thing. But yeah, so that's the background on Hef. But how he started Playboy, he realized that there was a market for such a thing amongst young men, and the kind of Polaroids and calendars and pictures of the time weren't really enough and weren't racy enough. And then he saw a gap in the market, and he realized that, wow, I've got a chance to to make some money here. You know what I mean? And his first coup was that he had a photograph of Marilyn Monroe, which was taken before she was a big star, and she was a big star at this point in the early days of Playboy. And by having that naked picture of Marilyn Monroe in Playboy, the first publication of it, the first edition of it, sold like hotcakes. Millions of copies were sold. And, you know, it's interesting to say that, you know, nowadays what he did would never have been allowed, because that image of Marilyn was taken, you know, by a photographer, and it was distributed by Playboy without her consent. So that's a big no-no these days, but they didn't have those type of laws then. But yeah, that was Hugh Hefner's first big coup with Playboy, and he only ever got the money to start Playboy in the first place because he had to beg his parents, his puritanical parents. Can you imagine that? Speaking to his God-fearing mother and father, not just God-fearing, but like extremely religious, saying, "Oh, I need to borrow a few grand." You know, in those days, which, you know, a few grand is a lot of money, but in those days, a few grand was a lot of money. You know, and to go to them and go, "Oh, can I please borrow this money so I can set up a nudie magazine business?" You know, I'm sure he put some spin on it and maybe played down the significance of the skin in the magazine, but nonetheless, he got the money from family and friends, and he started it. And like I said, he already had that access to that picture of Marilyn and published it. But yeah, I think that in hindsight, it's a really sick thing to do, because Marilyn Monroe never wanted to be in Playboy. You know what I mean? Hugh Hefner had bought that picture from really devious kind of means. Oh, hi, Diva Girl. So glad you could join us. Yeah, I had to start later on, you know, half an hour from when I was going to start, because I was having really bad Wi-Fi issues. You know what I mean? And like tried going on, and like I couldn't hear myself over StreamYard and stuff, and it was all laggy. So I had to start later. But I hope you're enjoying it now, and you're here now, and we're talking about Hugh Hefner and Playboy. And yeah, I'm getting into his background at the moment, where, you know, I was saying that he grew up in a really religious household, and he grew up in a really religious household, and like he only ever lost his virginity at 26. You know what I mean? When he had his first wife. So Hugh Hefner's background is very much of his time. He was born in the 1920s. You know what I mean? And yeah, his background is very much of the time. But we're getting into like the early days of Playboy now, where his first coup with it was a naked picture of Marilyn Monroe, which he'd acquired from a photographer who took it of her like years before she was famous, and then have published that when she was at like her peak, when Playboy was just starting, and it sold millions of copies, and that's what launched Playboy magazine initially. And you know, because to me that seems like really disgusting. You know what I mean? That he, you know, did it without Marilyn's consent and didn't pay her at all. Obviously, nowadays that would be completely illegal, but different rules in those days. No, yeah, but going into further details, well, Hugh Hefner paid like 30-40 grand so he could be buried next to Marilyn Monroe. And I mean, after doing that, you know what I mean? It's really sick and shady of him as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, wasn't a great guy, but yeah, that Marilyn Monroe pictorial was his first. It wasn't really a pictorial; it was just a picture. It was his kind of first coup with Playboy, and ever since then, it just propelled him into fame and infamy, really. And as the 50s became the 60s, Playboy just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as a result of the sexual revolution in the 1960s, you know, with free love and the hippie movements, Playboy was only getting stronger and stronger and stronger. and Hef was only getting richer and richer and richer. And around this time is when he started the concept of like the Playboy clubs, which would be nightclubs throughout the world that would have a Playboy theme and would be owned by Playboy. And this is kind of where we get into the dark side of things, because what I've heard and what I've been doing in researching this live stream, I've heard that from a lot of the women who worked at those Playboy clubs, that they were oftentimes pressured to sleep with customers like off property who were, high paying or who were prominent people. And then a lot of them were saying that they didn't feel they were able to say no because they felt that they'd be worried that they would lose their jobs. So you had coercion going on and pressure for women to, have sex with powerful men, even if they don't want to, really, and just that kind of atmosphere, and it completely contradicts the image that Hefner himself was trying to put out at that point, because he was getting attacked not just by the religious right now, but by feminism, which was a pretty new movement at that time. So his defense was that like this was enabling women to be liberated and have a freedom that they wouldn't otherwise have, when in reality in the Playboy clubs, women were basically treated like prostitutes, you know what I mean, but paid a lot less than prostitutes would get, you know what I mean. It's really sad, and there were these all kind of rules that a Playboy bunny had to live up to and do. They had to be able to hold the drinks tray a certain way and pick it up a certain way, and if they couldn't do it, they weren't allowed in, you know what I mean. And Hef, he obviously preferred them to be younger and all this kind of stuff, but it wasn't by any means a decent work environment from what I've heard. And having men, be violent with the women off property who were at these Playboy clubs is it's typical, of Hef. He never put any boundaries there to try and make it easier for him, make it easier for the women to have to be safe, you know what I mean. And obviously, in theory, there was no touching in the club, but I think that was only to save Hef from any kind of legal issues. I don't think it was out of care for the women, but sadly, there was a story from an ex Playboy bunny at the clubs as opposed to the mansion, which is what we know later on, who was saying that she'd seen things happen where women who were waitresses had gone away after work with a client, like an important member of the Playboy club or someone who was a friend of Hef, and like they'd never be seen again, you know what I mean? Like, and she could only deduce that whatever happened to them was so bad that they never wanted to come back to Playboy again. And we'll come back to that later about what that could mean and what could have happened, because there's all kinds of nastiness that he got up to that we'll get into. So stick with us. But yeah, I've put the link in the chat for a StreamYard in case anyone wants to come up. I understand this was pretty last minute, and also I was half an hour late. So, but yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I'm not too worried. I'm not worried at all. Yeah, I'm just happy to present the live to you. It doesn't really matter if there's a bunch of people here, but yeah, after the Playboy clubs, like that's when the mansion started. But initially, the mansion was in Chicago, and it wasn't really a mansion. The first property he bought was in Chicago, and it was still a very nice house. And there he'd have his HQ for Playboy, you know, and it would it would sort of act as a corporate HQ, and from there he'd like plan things, have parties, but he realized it was too small. So then his girlfriend at the time, Barbie Benton, who had connections in real estate, managed to find in LA what we now know as the Playboy Mansion, and it just been put up for sale because the owner had just divorced his wife, and Hefner got it for very little money. It was practically a steal, and yeah, Hef moved in there, and it's an old country English country style estate, and it had been there since California and LA was just full of farms, and I was going to ask what did he pay for it and what was the most recent sale. I think he paid he paid $1 million for it, and that was at the time insane because no property in America at that point had ever been bought for that amount of money, for such a high amount of money. $1 million when he bought the Playboy Mansion was an obscene amount of money. It's an obscene amount of money now, but it was incredibly obscene then. But he bought it for $1 million, and when he sold it before he bought it for $1 million, but it's worth now as a property, and it's worth when he sold it upwards 250 to 300 million because of so many different facets. Its location, right near UCLA, right there in the heart of LA. It's got a private zoo license. It's the only non-zoo property in the state of California that has a zoo license. So you can keep, if you own the property, you can have zoo animals there, which for someone like me would be a massive bonus because I love animals, and to be able to have different types of animals, not just your usual kind of house pets, would be a massive plus to me. But yeah, he bought it for $1 million, and when he sold it before he died, he sold it for upwards of 100 to 200 million, around that ballpark. But he was able to stay in it until he died, despite already having sold it. And the new owners now kind of have gotten rid of a lot of the stuff that used to be there, like the grotto and the pool and that kind of thing. And they're basically using it as a kind of corporate HQ for their business, which, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of a dumb idea. I think they should probably turn it into like a hotel or something. You know, it's got such a good location for that. Well, it's theirs. They can do what they want with it. You know what I mean? It's who am I to judge? But yeah, it's a very interesting house, and it's got all kinds of hidden rooms because it was built during Prohibition. So it's got a secret wine cellar. It's got secret doors, secret rooms, and I'm sure that I'm sure that Hugh Hefner enjoyed being there because there's lots of secret doors, secret rooms, secret passageways that Hef could, move through and check out the women in his place from and check out all the guests from. And we'll get back to this. You know, Hef liked to watch people having sex who didn't necessarily know he was watching them, so he had secret rooms, secret doors, secret mirrors, so he could watch guests having sex, and he would also film guests having sex who didn't know it. That was another thing of his. Hugh Hefner was a voyeur. His ex, Sandra Theodore, who was his girlfriend in the 70s, who was also a Playboy playmate, said that Hef would oftentimes film sexual encounters of his and of guests with the girls, with the playmates, to get dirt on them, and also for his own kicks because it gave him a sense of power. And Hef was honestly, it's a good thing he was from a different generation because he would be going down now, even though it wasn't that long ago since he passed. Yeah, you're right. I don't think he'd be able to do what he did now. I think that attitudes have changed. Women have been, the view of women and the way women are treated in society has changed. Just because a woman takes her clothes off doesn't mean that she doesn't deserve to be listened to. People don't think like that anymore, thankfully. And it's, hey, Neat, so glad you could join us, and Weinstein. Exactly, since them, since like since Me Too, Hefner died just as Me Too was starting. So if he'd have stayed alive, I'm sure he'd have been Me Too because of everything we're going to get into. But yeah, I think that Weinstein and Epstein is a watershed moment in our society, in the Western world, because never again will someone just be believed because they've got money and because they're a man. You know what I mean? I don't think that that's right. You know what I mean? I think like with Weinstein and Epstein, if enough people say something about you, it's probably true. You know what I mean? With that level of veracity, and the same kind of stories from so many different women. And it's the same with Hefner. It's the same with Hefner because these stories are consistent through different girlfriends from the 60s, from the start of it, right until the end, like with Crystal Hefner and the girls from Girls Next Door, like Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. So they all kind of say the same thing. So, yeah, it's good that those things happened so that that those people were exposed, so that we've been able to move forward as a society. And this was just accepted in YouTube, in Hollywood YouTube. Sorry, I was getting confused with Neat Noodle's comment, and yours, Diva. And this was just accepted in Hollywood. Exactly, it was accepted like with this, like with Hef, this thin veneer of, oh, I'm liberating the women, you know what I mean? Like, he was controlling the women, you know what I mean? Playmates were controlled, and we'll get into this, were very controlled. There was no freedom there, and they weren't paid anywhere near as well as they should have been, and didn't get a cut off magazine sales. You know what I mean? They were paid a flat rate, which is a lot less than they could have gotten if they agreed to a percentage. You know what I mean? And Hef never did that because he was a parasite. He wasn't just a sexual predator. He was a financial predator as well. And you'll see this with a lot of them, that they are that way. They're like that with everything. They're predatory when it comes to every aspect of their life. YouTube just booted me, Harold. Yeah, screw you, YouTube. Don't be booting my viewers. watch the stream get mysteriously pulled down now. No, that won't happen. But yeah, Hugh and Jeffrey aren't that different, in my opinion. Oh, absolutely. And it wouldn't surprise me if we heard something about Hugh Hefner and Jeffrey Epstein having bonds and ties together and partying together, because they're certainly the same type of guy. Don't get me wrong there, but yeah. Back onto the dark side of Hef. Sandra Theodore, who was interviewed for the series that I've been watching called The Dark Side of Playboy. And also there's another series called The Secrets of Playboy. And these are all out there. And these interview ex-playmates. And they just talk about the different experiences that they went through there. And it gets really messed up, because I think I used to watch The Girls Next Door, which was the TV show about the Playmates when it first aired back in the 2000s. So, like with Holly Madison, Bridget Marcord, and Kendra Wilkinson, they were all on it as Hef's girlfriends. And when I was watching it as quite a young kid, I used to have this I would have this idealized image of it. I'd be like, oh my god, that looks so cool. Like, I wish Hefner was my dad. You know what I mean? I wish I could live there. But now in hindsight, obviously you realize that you wouldn't want that. You know what I mean? Because I think as a father, he was very emotionally unavailable to his kids. and difficult to speak to and relate to, especially, fact he was born in the 1920s, you know what I mean? And how easy is it going to be for someone to relate to, their dad when their dad's like fucking 60 years older than them? You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing. But yeah, I think my view of that was because it was idealized and glamorized, and that's the image they wanted you to see. They wanted the men to see it and go, wow, isn't this like heaven? And they wanted the women to see it and think the same thing too, that this is a form of freedom and liberation. And these women are paid really well. They have a great life living at the mansion. They've got all their needs tended to. But that really wasn't the case. You know what I mean? That was just the image that they wanted us to see. Behind the scenes, if you were going to be one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends, you had to follow a lot of rules. You had to keep thin. You had to keep your body type to be a certain way. Plastic surgery was needed if you didn't have big enough breasts. He was very much like demanding of his, and completely controlling of his girlfriends. Like they couldn't go anywhere without him, couldn't do anything without him. They weren't allowed to earn money that he wasn't giving them. That's the playmates, you know what I mean? His girlfriends. So when Holly, Bridget, and Kendra were there on The Girls Next Door, they were only getting paid like $1,000 a week. And you say, well, that's not bad, but compared to how much they could have got for what they were getting from the pictorials from the show itself, it's nothing. They got basically no money from the show, and they were the stars. Nobody watched it for Hugh. They watched it for Holly, for Bridget, and for Kendra. You know what I mean? But Hugh didn't like that because it's like 100% his rules. He wanted it to be all about him when he just didn't have the energy to do anything in the show. Their allowance from him blew that away. Exactly. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? He would just do that. I say you can only have your allowance, you know what I mean, to make them, and you're not allowed to save money. It's basically to keep them in chains to him, to keep them controlled and dependent on him. And that's just typical like abusive like behavior, you know what I mean, controlling, coercive behavior. And he was always like that. He was always like that with all of the playmates, and they just accepted it because it was an opportunity, and they had curfew and all kinds of stuff like that, didn't they? Yes, they did. They had to, on weeknights, they had to be back at the mansion by 10. It's like being a child, you know what I mean? Like, imagine, Diva Girl, like you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I don't know what you're into. I'm not just going to assume. But like, imagine if you had a partner and they were telling you, oh, you've got to be back by 10. And you're not allowed to earn money that I don't tell you can earn. And I control all your money. And I control when you come back. And I control your body. And I control what you eat. And I control when you have sex. You wouldn't feel like a person. You'd feel like a slave. That's slavery. You know what I mean? You don't have, even if you're getting a little bit of money, that's still slavery to me. So he wasn't much different than a pimp. Absolutely not. He was a glorified pimp. And the girls were sadly treated, who were models, who were sadly treated like prostitutes, you know what I mean? And treated horrifically, There'd be one hell of an allowance, yeah. Only $1,000 a week when really those women could have been making a lot more than that. And obviously now with the advent of like the internet, well, obviously the internet was around when he was around, but the way the internet is now, if women want to sell pictures of themselves that are provocative, they don't really need to go to Playboy for it and be hooked under some guy like Hugh Hefner's control. They can do it and make their own money and kind of cut out the middleman if they want to do that. You know what I mean? And I think that's a much more healthy society than having a guy like him, control your life and make you, and abuse you. Because all of his ex-girlfriends, and from Sandra Theodore in the 70s to Crystal Hefner in the 2000s, all of them have said that he was an abusive piece of shit. You know what I mean? Uh, and I, like I was saying earlier, I don't think anyone was here. He was like cheated on by his first wife, and had like an early two rocky marriages. And I think his early bad experiences with women, he developed a kind of fierce misogyny to kind of, in his mind, protect himself and also get revenge, I think, on all women. And that's a pretty fucked up way to think. You know what I mean? Like, just because was treated badly by one or two women doesn't mean he has to assume all women are pieces of shit. You know what I mean? It's just stupid, like, lack of logic. You know what I mean? It's a, you know. Did I hear you mention when he lost his virginity? Yes, he lost his virginity age 26, which is obviously, you'd probably be surprised now, but considering he was born in the 20s, it's not that bizarre that he obviously lost it in later life. And the public relations was incredible for the time. They certainly worked hard to convince the masses everything was amazing. Absolutely. That's what I talk about in my community. That's what I talked about in my community post and when I was promoting the live. Like, we're going to peel back behind the glitz and the glamour and to see it for its ugly, dark underbelly. You know what I mean? And that, you're right, it was a carefully crafted PR image that, to women, women who, you can make money by being beautiful, and you can have a freedom that you wouldn't ordinarily have. You're not going to be pigeonholed to be a housewife or work a low paying job. You can do this and live in the mansion and party with celebs and have this idealized life. It's brilliant. And men, you can have a life like this. You know what I mean? If you've got money and you have these kinds of parties, and you can come into this lifestyle too. So it's selling a lifestyle that wasn't even true to begin with, because it wasn't like people were there like without being coerced, you know what I mean, and abused. 26. Wow. Yep. It was very, nowadays it seems completely out there, like very later in life, but for the time, not bizarre at all. In those days, that's what people mostly did, waited for marriage, and a very different society that he came into. But yeah, it's really, really interesting that that you say the images, money and power are very much intertwined, and Hefner had a lot of both. And then I'm going to get into the start of having the playmates, because obviously I was talking about how Barbie Benton, one of his famous girlfriends, helped him pick out the place. And then when he finally moved there, that's when he started having the parties that he was famous for, having the celebrities there, when people like Bill Cosby, James Caan, and a lot of other people would go and would party at the mansion. And obviously, we know about Mr. Cosby now, and we now know that Bill was allowed to go to the Playboy mansion and molest and rape women, and Hef was okay with this and knew about it and would join in. Sandra Theodore said that Hef would regularly do what Cosby was known to have done: drug women, and then when they passed out, have sex with them, rape them. You know what I mean? And he would often say to Sandra, and these women think they can sleep in my house without having sex with me, they've got another thing coming. You know what I mean? And that is just, and Sandra Theodore in The Dark Side of Playboy, I feel so bad for her, breaks down and just says, like, I feel like a monster for not doing anything to stop him. You know what I mean? But the reality is, she must have been terrified of him. She talks about Hef talking about watching snuff films and talking about seeing tapes where they have sex with a woman and then beat her to death. All these kinds of things that if you're a woman or anybody would make you go, oh my God, this guy's a fucking psychopath. You know what I mean? And he had power and he had money. So I don't think she or anybody should beat themselves up about anything that happened, because I think it was pretty clear that if she had said something, Hef probably would have sent someone to rub her out, to shut her up back then. And, that's the reality. That's why none of these women spoke out, because A, who's going to believe them? Power dynamics, money dynamics, and B, like Hef had the power to get them like killed if they, had spoke out. You know what I mean? I've not heard any reports that he threatened to kill anyone of the women, but I think that they all knew that he had it in him to be a mean son of a bitch, and that they didn't want to test him. And I think that that's very much what it was. Did he provide some of the drugs? I don't know. I don't know that I'm asking. Yes, he would drug the women and would help Bill Cosby and other male celebrities in the drugging of Playmates. They'd use usually they'd use Quaaludes. He'd usually use Quaaludes back in the day, and would often give, and that's what multiple women who were ex Playmates have said, that like, he would invite them into his room, and they'd like sit down they'd be there on their own, and he'd like talk to them about their pictorial and about who's going to make Playmate of the month. You know what I mean? And that's a big deal for the Playmates to be Playmate of the month. And a woman who was a Playmate went in there, and she was like, this is quite a common tale, that she'd go in there and Hef would be like, oh, you seem nervous, and then he'd give her a Quaalude, and then he'd take his advantage of her when she was passed out, and like they'd wake up and they'd be confused, you know what I mean, about what happened, and then they'd just try and block it away. But that happened with multiple different women, and women, who only were able to speak about it years later out of fear and the power imbalance, and it's so sad. And Sandra Theodore, who was his ex, is a wealth of all this type of knowledge about him. It gets pretty dark, she suggests that she once found Hef trying to molest her dog and never let him near her animals ever again. And so the guy had no shame, and she says that she saw something in his eyes that would just make her think that he was like the devil incarnate. Like, she just saw something in his eyes that was like totally detached from any kind of reality, and just really messed up, but it doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. It really doesn't at all. I think that ultimately, his legacy will be one of just depravity. You know what I mean, and not liberating women. You know what I mean. I think, like I say, that's the PR image. You know what I mean? He played the game of convincing women they were free, and at the same time having them in bondage. You know what I mean? The worst type of manipulation. Well, to be honest with you, I think as soon as the women got acquainted with life at the mansion, they'd realize how not free they were. You know what I mean? Imagine, like we were just saying, imagine being an adult and having a curfew. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of nonsense is that? Being told when you have to come in and come and go and stuff. But yeah, that's just insane. But we'll get on to like all of the celebrities that were there, and obviously I've mentioned the dog. Yeah, that crosses like every line. Some people have to keep pushing boundaries. They keep looking for new highs. You're very, very right. You know what I mean? Like, if I ever get my hands on anyone who did that to a dog, you know what I mean, or an animal, I'm a big animal lover, I would just lose it. You know what I mean? It's worst kind of shit. You know what I mean? It's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's as bad as doing it to a child. You know what I mean? I'm that hard line about it. You know what I mean? And I believe Sandra Theodore, because the guy was a pervert. You know what I mean? And that's what perverts do. You know what I mean? Sick shit. And you know, I actually reached out to Sandra Theodore to try and get her on, but she didn't see my DM. You know what I mean? And I don't blame her. You know what I mean? If she wants a quiet life, doesn't want to have to keep going over this shit. You know what I mean? I don't blame her. It's traumatic enough. But yeah, her interviews have provided me with a lot to talk about tonight, and she really, spoke about her journey in a very interesting and strong way, and she's come through it, and she's found spirituality, and that helps her deal with the trauma. You know what I mean, of what she's been through, and good for her. I hope she finds peace in it, and I hope all of them find peace. All of these women, you know what I mean. They went in there, wanting to be models, wanting to be glamorous, wanting to have this high life, you know what I mean, and having all the skills to go with it. Because what you'll find is a lot of these playmates, the image that people have of these models is that they're all airheads and that they're just big-breasted bimbos, and that really it's just their bodies that are important. They've got nothing upstairs. I would completely disagree with that. You know what I mean? From what I've seen, all the ex-playmates are really smart women. You know what I mean? Really smart women who, in other situations, they'd be in nowadays, they'd be the ones running these like pictorials. They'd be the ones running these magazines. You know what I mean? Not Hef, not some dirty old man. You know what I mean? They would be the ones running these modeling agencies. You know what I mean? The playmates. So, like from just watching Girls Next Door as well, the show that was about the girls who were living there in the 2000s, who were his girlfriends. Even in that, you see that, and also listening to the podcast that Bridget and Holly do, talking about that. And Holly Madison's book is a great resource to talk about. Holly Madison was Hef's main girlfriend for years, and she was like on Girls Next Door and a lot of other stuff. And you'll probably recognize her if you see her. But yeah, she's got a wealth of knowledge, and she's very, very intelligent. Her and Bridget are, and that kind of, so that this image that all models are like, it's just not true. From what I've seen, a lot of them are really smart. You know what I mean, and have more skills than just their looks. You know what I mean, and which is a shame that like Playboy in the show Girls Next Door kind of pigeonholed them in that way. You know what I mean. But there's a lot more to them than that, and I hope that gets known, And but yeah, like from watching that show, I just and listening to the podcast in hindsight, I just realized that like it's absolutely like not how I ever thought it was. You know what I mean? And it was like a cult, for want of a better words. It's a cult, you know what I mean? A cult of Playboy, and he was the cult leader, and keep pulling everybody in line. But we're gonna talk about there are some specific dark sides of Playboy. There are murders linked to Playboy, which we'll get into, and that'll be interesting to discuss. And we have many different cases, like the one of Dorothy Stratton, who was a playmate who was killed by her by a man who was her husband, and he was obsessed with her and was controlling her. Very much like Hugh was as well, but poor woman was being controlled both ways. But Dorothy Stratton was a playmate, and she was playmate of the year, very, very popular. Was spotted by someone from Playboy when she was at an ice cream shop, a Dairy Queen, I think it was, something like that, and she had this like small town girl next door look that they were looking for, which Playboy always really looked for. And then her whole life was changed, and she stayed with the guy that she was with from her hometown, and he started just taking all of her money, you know what I mean, and being awful to her. And so she was getting treated awfully by Hef and by her husband. So there was no winning for her. Hi, Tash. Glad you could join us, and I'm so glad you're listening and wrapping some gifts. That's great. Yeah, happy holidays, everybody. You know, I understand that obviously I started later than I said I was, and it's nearing the holidays, so I understand people aren't going to be as chatty or as watching it in the numbers that my last live got, but it doesn't matter to me. I'm just happy to have one person here, you know what I mean? Never mind the 400 I got on my last stream. That isn't why I do it, you know what I mean? I just do it because I love doing it, you know what I mean? And I really appreciate all the support that I've gotten from all of you, you know what I mean? It really means a lot that you're joining me for this. But so yeah, we've got Dorothy Stratton, who was murdered by her husband Paul Snyder, who himself then took his own life, which is tragic, but it just shows you like the lack of protection, I guess, that Playboy, and lack of concern for the playmates, you know what I mean, that it was going. So okay, that's okay. You're still doing what you love doing. We appreciate your coverage. Oh, great! Thanks so much, Tash. That really means a lot. And we also have the death of Eve Stratford in London in 1975. Now, I was talking previously about the Playboy clubs, and she was a member of the Playboy Club in London. And like I was saying, if anyone who wasn't here, like the Playboy Club was like a nightclub. It wasn't a strip club. You know, you couldn't touch them. There was no touching. There was no like. There were like dances, like the Moulin Rouge type stuff. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. You know, like classy, not not dirty. The burlesque type shit. Yeah, and like she was a member of that club, and she was found in her flat in her apartment building in 1975, stabbed to death, and it's never been solved. And one of the theories put forward is that she was silenced by Playboy itself on the orders of Hugh Hefner because she saw something she may not have been supposed to see. You know what I mean? Because there was a man who was a frequent visitor of the Playboy Club, who was a very, very rich man who came from a very rich family. I'm not sure if they were from Jordan or Lebanon, one of those type of countries. And he was living in London, and like he was like a regular there, and he was like a VIP guy, and he had a major obsession with her. And then she wound up dead, you know what I mean? So he was questioned about it, but was released. So I think maybe there was some Playboy cover up going on there to protect their VIPs, and that's what you'll find. Bill Cosby was protected by Hugh Hefner, and other celebrities that were alleged to have committed sex assaults, all the types of crimes at the mansion or on Playboy property were protected by Hugh. If you're his friend, you don't get in trouble. You know what I mean? If you're his buddy, you get to do what he gets to do. You know what I mean? It's your playground as well. You know what I mean? As sick as that is, you know what I mean? Predators protect predators. You know what I mean? And it's the way it goes. But yeah, that is a really horrible case, and that was one of the earlier ones. And we've got also there's many other ones like Starstow as well, who used to be a Playboy playmate. She used to date Gene Simmons, and she was like very famous for her time in the 80s because she was a playmate and she was dating Gene Simmons. And Gene Simmons like says like he was really serious about it. Like he obviously, those of you who know Gene from Kiss, big ladies man, even now, you know what I mean? Like he's with Shannon Tweed, but like he's still they basically have an open marriage essentially. But Jean was like, has said, like, if I was ever to have been serious and just with one woman, it would have been Starstow. And she sadly died. She went on hard times after Playboy, and but turned to escorting and had a drug problem. You know what I mean? And sadly, not all of them, but a lot of them, that ends up the life that they go down. You know what I mean? They don't. They go into this world. They get treated poorly and abused, and then they get spat out when they're of no use to Hugh and the machine anymore, and left to fend for themselves. And that's just horrific. And I feel terrible for Starstow. And for all the other women who are put in that position, the amount of money that they earned, that man, he was a predator. They got very little back. All they got back was abuse and a little bit of money. But yeah, Starstow was escorting in the 90s after she left Playboy and the scene, and was killed by one of her Johns, sadly, and body not recovered. So yeah, it's not. Oh yeah, the body was recovered. Yeah, the body was recovered. So yeah, there's a lot more now, and also another interesting aspect of this, another Playboy murder, is an interesting one. Stephanie Adams. It really is, Tash, you know, because like I just feel terrible for these women because I think the media, like, and certain men, I think, and some women as well, like, look down on them because they think, oh, these are just prostitutes. These are just whores, you know, they don't deserve to, you know, any sympathy, and demonizing women who display sexuality, you know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous, you know what I mean? And they were models. They were models. And I don't find anything obscene about the female body. I don't think the female body and form is obscene in any way. You know what I mean? I think people who do think it's obscene have issues, you know what I mean? Have hang-ups. I don't think there's anything obscene about a human body, you know what I mean? And if people want to do that type of thing, you know what I mean? I don't judge them for it. You know what I mean? They have rights, but these women, they were models. They went in there, and Playboy was something that marketed itself as being more highbrow than Hustler. You know what I mean? And Penthouse, and all the, and Jugs and all the other ones. You know, it painted itself as being more classy. You know what I mean? For someone with more sophistication. You know, but the way the women were treated was just awful. But yeah. This case of Stephanie Adams, who you might know, she was in Scarface. You know the scene where before the chainsaw situation happened with the Colombians, where there's that blonde-haired girl and she's leaning across the car with the Colombians. That's her. She was a playmate, and what's weird is she is the one who disappeared. And Coffee, I think you'll find that it's me who was late. You were here on time. I had to start the live late, sadly, because I was having Wi-Fi issues. So I started a half an hour later than I was originally going to. But I'm just glad you're here now, and I'm glad everybody's here now. You know what I mean? My bad, but we fixed it all up. Absolutely, Jay. Many of them had pretty extensive trauma leading up to Playboy, let alone during and after. Exactly. A lot of the women talked about, like, past in the secrets of Playboy and interviews with ex-playmates that I've listened to. A lot of the women talk about being abused as kids, you know, and that being a way for them to retake their sensuality, their sexuality, and have that power themselves, you know what I mean? And they saw Playboy as a means to do that, and like that mentality, great, you know what I mean? Like you're taking back your control over your image of your body, you know what I mean, and of yourself, you know what I mean? Like, and also women who've been beaten and women who like worked at the Playboy Club, even, you know, who'd never, you know, no woman in their family had ever had a job before, you know what I mean? And they were providing money to their family who otherwise wouldn't have gotten it, you know. So there's lots of stuff, lots of baggage that, you know, I admittedly, when I was younger, fell into the trap of thinking that models were, you know, well, they're not really there for their thoughts, really, are they? But no, you know, I admit that I was, you know, I was like a child at the time when I thought this, you know what I mean? But like, I admit, like, that I was completely wrong, you know what I mean? Like, from all the women that I've seen interviewed related to this, they're some of the most intelligent women that I've heard from, you know what I mean? Strongest, some of the strongest as well, to go through all that and still be able to, you know, function, you know what I mean? Gilgo Beach was ignored forever because the victims were sex workers. They should have recognized what was going on out there long before they did. 100%, you know what I mean? There's a reason why serial killers and rapists target sex offenders the way they do, because they know that society looks down upon them. You know what I mean? And we need to get rid of that. These were women. These are people. You know what I mean? They were somebody's daughter. You know, same with Playboy, but in the Gilgo Beach. You know what I mean? And Stephanie Adams, who I was talking about, and all the women who died related to Playboy, they were somebody's daughter. They were a little girl once. They played with dollies. You know, they played with toys. They were just a child at one point. You know what I mean? And to think, you know, to just demonize them because of what they do for a living. And when I'm sure a lot of them, especially the sex workers, don't want to be doing that. They're kind of forced into that situation because they've got messed up childhoods and like they've been molested or abused, and they need drugs to mask that, to not have to think about that all the time, you know, and like, you know, and they deserve to die for that. Absolutely not. You know what I mean? And they deserve to be ignored and forgotten about. The reason they're ignored and they're forgotten is because it raises ugly questions for society. Why are we allowing this to happen? Like, why are we allowing children to be treated so badly in childhood so that they are left with no other choice in adulthood but to sell themselves? You know what I mean? And that's obviously not the same as Playboy, the sex work, the prostitution, but certainly close. You know, I don't judge sex workers. In many cases, I just feel bad for them because I know that very rarely are they ever, you know, able to do this, you know, independently without a pimp. Or very rarely, I think, do they actually really want to be doing it. You know what I mean? I think that, you know, if you're thinking that that's all you've got to offer the world, you know what I mean? You've been pretty beaten down, you know. But like I say, they do it out of necessity, like the ones in Gilgo Beach, you know, like a lot of them were probably abused and needed it for drug money to just block out all the bullshit that happened to them, you know, and because of the trauma, it was probably hard for them to get any kind of normal job anyway and add on the addiction. So, yeah, as a society, we really need to think more about people. We shouldn't be demonizing sex workers. We shouldn't be demonizing playmates. We should be demonizing the pimps and the Hugh Hefners of the world, not these women who are the victims of it all. You know what I mean? You know, I'm glad that society has evolved in many ways. And there's a lot of parts about woke and cancel culture that I can't stand. But Me Too and calling out like sexual harassment of women and the way women are seen and portrayed, I'm completely in agreement with. You know what I mean? I think that that's been going on for too long. You know what I mean? And we need to be treated equally in our society and valued equally. But yeah, tangent over. Yeah, I'm glad that everyone's in agreement. I don't remember which one it was, but I heard one interview where a woman said that she wasn't doing anything she hadn't already been subjected to in her life, so she might as well get money for it. Yeah, that's the same thing with Playboy. You'll find like a lot of his girlfriends weren't into what he was wanting them to do sexually because he coerced them to try, and you know, women who were not bisexual or like bi-curious or lesbian or at all, he would kind of pressure them to be with other women in front of him, which is rape. You know what I mean? Like coercive control and not with their consent. That is rape. That's sexual assault. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You know what I mean? And also anal and other types of, not to be too crass but crude, but yeah, he would pressure them to do these types of things. And like a lot of the women, his ex-girlfriends would say, yeah, it reminds me of my childhood with my father. You know what I mean? So I was very accustomed to that. And sadly, like, it's what a lot of his Hugh Hefner's ex-girlfriend said. And he even said that to Sandra Theodore. He said, I like to get the ones with daddy issues because they never say no. And that speaks to the type of sick mindset this guy had. He targeted these women. He knew what he was doing. You know, he gave them all the glitz and the glamour, you know what I mean? And then control them. Not as much pressure on LE from the public to seek justice, similar to addicts. Exactly, that needs to change, you know what I mean? We need to care just the same as, like, about a woman with a woman with a husband and kids as we do about a single woman who's a drifter. You know what I mean? Because they're both somebody's little girl. You know what I mean? They both mean the same in the eyes of the law, or should do anyway, just not in the eyes of society. But we need to do something about that. You know what I mean? And if it, you know, like these days, you know, if a man speaks out saying like, you know, he thinks women should be treated a little better, you know, you get called a simp, you know what I mean? Or, you know, all this type of stuff. But like, you know, I advocate for human rights, you know what I mean? And if that gets me get called a simp, I don't care. I'd much rather live in a society where people don't have to, you know, worry about being in some situation where they're trafficked or they get into some predatory cult-like relationship with a guy who's essentially supposed to be their boss, like with the Playboy. Like, I want a society where, you know, I don't have any children, but if I had a daughter, you know what I mean? I don't want to bring a girl into a world where she's not treated the same as the men, you know what I mean? Or you know, where she doesn't have rights, you know, to protect herself, where society would gaslight her if she was the victim of something. You know what I mean? I don't want to live in a world like that. I mean, and anyone who does is probably a predator themselves. You know what I mean? So that's why such, you know, lies, or not really lies, but any kind of name calling against me just doesn't work. You know what I mean? I know I'm right when it comes to women need to be treated better. And that's how the Grim Sleeper killer got away with his murders for so long. His victims are usually sex workers who had addictions. Exactly. And that's what most serial killers and most rapists target. You know what I mean? Like Hugh Hefner knew what he was doing. You know what I mean? Who would believe a playmate had been raped by Hugh? You know what I mean? Like they all love Hugh. They're all queuing up for sex with Hugh, and all these playmates, they love sex. You know what I mean? Like they're all about sex. They could never be raped. They love sex. And it's like people who think, oh, a prostitute, she couldn't be raped. She's a prostitute. They love sex. That's all they do. Ha ha. You know what I mean? It's people who have like a really fucked up view of the world and who don't understand what sexual assault is and the definitions of it. You know what I mean? Or don't want to. You know what I mean? And like, just because someone does a job doesn't mean they have less rights than me or than somebody else. You know what I mean? Just because someone's a sex worker of any kind doesn't mean that they have less rights. You know what I mean? Than anybody else. You know what I mean? I just get worried that, you know what I mean? I'm never going to encourage anybody to go into sex work because I know, like other people do, because I know what it leads to. You know what I mean? It can lead to these situations of, you know, trafficking of abuse. Not because I've been in it, but because I've, you know, done research on it. You know, all this research for this live, and you know, I just don't think it's, you know, obviously OnlyFans is taking off, and you know, women and men can do it without that middleman now. So I think that those ways of doing it is probably better than the Playboy model and the other kind of model where it's like, you know, you've got like a boss, you know, and then there can be sleazy and pressure you to do certain things and be abusive. So I guess, you know, when you can be your own boss, it's better. But I don't think that these companies have the best interests of their performers at heart either. So yeah, I don't think very highly of any of these corporations. But you know, to people who want to make money that way, all power to you. I'm not going to shame you. You know, there's been enough of that. It was infuriating. Yeah. He anticipated that lifestyle, as in to be propositioned by men with money or favors, whatever that may be. Yeah. I think that some of the playmates may have anticipated. Well, for sex workers, yes, but for the playmates at the play, I'm not sure exactly which one which you're talking about, because we have been talking about different subjects, you know what I mean, like closely tied ones. But yeah, I think with most of the playmates, I don't think any of them really knew that like sex with hef was expected. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's something. Oh, hi Val, so glad you could join us. Yeah, don't worry, Val. Yeah, I was late too. I was half an hour late. The gremlins were acting up. Which is an inside joke between like me and Val. Like, when Val used to do her streams, whenever there was a tech issue, she'd say there was gremlins around, and she used to have a little gremlin emoji that we'd spam in chat. And I really miss your lives, Val, and I'm so glad you joined us. But yeah, I had some gremlins that I had to fight off with some chicken, and they've been fed now, and they're not bothering me. But yeah, there's no Wi-Fi issues, and I've started. But yeah, I guess it's good in a way that I started later so you could join us. But yeah, we're talking about Playboy and sex work in Gilgo Beach and how women are, you know, sex workers and women who pose like that are oftentimes treated with less like humanity and less empathy than women who don't, and how I think that that's wrong. You know, that every woman should be treated the same. Everybody should be treated with the same kind of respect, regardless of what they do for a living. You know. And for some strippers too, to a degree, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? It's like, and the same people who believe a spouse partner can't be sexually assaulted, asinine and ignorant. Exactly. And the sad reality is, in some countries, that still is the case. You know what I mean? Legally speaking, obviously, it's still rape, but it can't be prosecuted under the law. And in our country, up until not very long ago, it was still legal in some states for husbands to rape their wives. It wouldn't be considered rape. You know what I mean? And that's just horrific. What kind of society is that? You know what I mean? And I just feel terrible for the women in the countries where you have like no rights. You know what I mean? Like Afghanistan and all these other countries where, you know, you have to be escorted by men. You know what I mean? And men face issues, and men have our own issues in society, but I'm not going to say that they're worse than women's, because there's nowhere in the world where we have to be escorted by a woman everywhere, where we're essentially owned by our wives. You know what I mean? There's a different kind of kettle of fish. You know what I mean? And I feel just really, you know, bad for those women. You know, and yeah, but. So awesome! You were going live. You were going live. Oh, I'm so glad you think so. Yeah, I've been doing lives more. You know, like obviously, you know about the situation with my grandmother. She passed, and she was getting sick. And I thought doing more lives, socializing with people, like would be a good idea. And Amber, you know, having me up on a panel, you know, ATS News. Gave me the kind of bug for doing lives again, you know, which I first got when I was going on your panel, Val, you know, and back in the day, you know, with your 12-hour lives, you know what I mean, that never felt like 12 hours, you know what I mean? God, I could never sit up here on my own and do that a length of time now. Oh my God, you know what I mean? You're a saint. You have to be some kind of saint, you know what I mean, to be able to do the lives you did. God, I miss it. You know what I mean? I really miss them, and I know a lot of other people do too. You know what I mean? You know, I would love to maybe have you up on here sometime. You know what I mean? If you could. If you could if you'd like to join, you know what I mean. Anyone's allowed up from the chat. You know what I mean. I'd love to have someone here. Yes, I'm so sorry to hear that. Glad the lives glad the lives helped you. Oh, you're very welcome, Val, and thanks for and Tash. Thanks for everyone for being very sympathetic. You know, it's been helping me. You know, doing this and being social. And sorry, Jay, just to clarify, I was assuming that some of the playmates were stripped. Well, I think some of the I think a lot of the playmates had stripped before. Or at the Playboy clubs, they didn't strip because it was certain licensing laws that they didn't allow. That they had burlesque shows though, similar but different. Not like you know, not like how you not at all like a strip club. You know what I mean? Like burlesque shows are very high class. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that there's anything kind of you know shady about a burlesque show. But yeah, I think a lot of the women, some of them knew that they probably were going to have sex with Hef. Some of them didn't. You know what I mean? And I think it was a mixed bag. You know what I mean? They were groomed, in my opinion. Sold them the perfect fantasy, leading a life most had never experienced. Most were also young enough; they hadn't even reached complete brain development. I completely agree with you. Like, it's this image of women, beautiful women. You can be your own boss. You can earn millions. You can have this life living in one of the nicest mansions in LA where you get to party with movie stars, rock stars, and football players all the time. Who wouldn't want that? If you're a 20-year-old girl, you're good looking. You know what I mean? You've got a nice smile. Why wouldn't you want to do that? You know what I mean? Like, think of all the things that could offer you, Hollywood. You know what I mean? Like, look at just in the Girls on Next Level alone, the show about Girls Next Door alone. You know what I mean? Kendra, you know what I mean, was the youngest of them all. She was only 20 when that show was shot. She was barely even like not a teenager anymore. You know what I mean? And her grandfather, who was even shown in the show, was younger than Hef. You know what I mean? So her grandfather was born in the 1930s. Hef was born in the 20s. So yeah, it just shows you like, and Holly and Bridget had all come from really like rural kind of simple backgrounds. So yeah, like we come from bumfuck nowhere. You know what I mean? Like this chance to go to LA to be with the stars, to have this like life where you're respected, you're honored as a playmate, you know what I mean? You're revered, you're idealized, you know what I mean? Like, and you have every whim taken care of. Like, why wouldn't you want that? You know what I mean? You've got a gym, you've got a petting zoo at the mansion, you've got everything, you've got on-site cosmetic surgeon that does it all in-house. You know what I mean? All the boob jobs, the Brazilian butt lifts, everything. You know what I mean? Like, why? Who wouldn't? You know what I mean? Like, which woman wouldn't want that? You know what I mean? It was young, but like, then you get there and then you realize curfew, control, you have to have sex with Hef. You have to do things sexually that you might not want to do. You know what I mean? And there's coercion, there's control, and there's drugs, and there's all this, and there's sleeping with celebrities as a favor for Hef that you might not want to do, and all this kind of shit, and then also recruiting other women to do the same. So it's a real nasty kind of spiral. But yeah, I completely agree, Tash. You know what I mean? The countries that have the sexual disfigurements terrify. Yeah, the like in like Somalia and certain countries where women have their areas removed. Oh my god, you know what I mean? Like, what kind of thinking is behind that? You know what I mean? Like, ugh. Like, I just feel terrible for those poor girls that have to go through that. That's just ugh. I hope we can get to a place one day where that is just, not happening in the world. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we're all ever all going to be on the same page 100% on everything, but just to get to a point where at least women and children can just be, and everybody, and men and everybody can just have basic human rights everywhere, and that they're respected. You know what I mean? Even in these out of the way countries, you know what I mean? Like, I don't see why, you know what I mean? And those that use like religion as a defense, you know what I mean? I don't tend to believe that if there is a higher power, he would invent an entire gender just to be oppressed. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't, I don't agree with that. You know what I mean? I believe in higher powers and gods and things like that. And I don't think that they would ever, you know, create a gender to just like women to just be oppressed. You know what I mean? I think that that's an insult. You know what I mean? I think that that's disgusting. You know, and that's why I have problems with that type of thinking. You know what I mean? But yeah, and well, I don't know how we were able to do the 12 hours. It's so long. There was something. Oh, exactly. Yeah, Val. It was crazy. Yeah, like I don't like. And the thing is, like, for those 12 hours, like you never like dropped to like low views. Like, we kept most of the people for that length of time. You know what I mean? And we were on panel for most of that. You know what I mean? And like, it was weird because we always left people wanting more. Like, it was always like you were always like messaging me in the private chat saying like, I like, can we maybe try and end it now, and like start to try and like transition to an end, because everyone in chat was just like roaring for more, you know. And like, it was just such an experience, and I always look back on those times like with real fondness. You know what I mean? Like, I loved it. You know what I mean? And I loved uh, our Hotel Cecil live as well. That was my favorite. I still hope both of us can go and visit what was the Hotel Cecil together. Not stay the night, you know, because bed bugs and stuff, you know. Which I would assume inhabit the hell out of that place. But yeah, I'm just glad you're here. Which just means they were used to being proposition. Yeah. You're right. You're right. They were probably used to it. Yeah, a lot of them were used to it. But in the situation with Hef, there's a difference, because they probably didn't feel like in the other times they probably felt more than able to tell the guy to screw off. You know what I mean? But with Hef, powerful. He can make or break their career. If they're a model, he could have them blacklisted. No one will shoot for them again. You know what I mean? They'll never work again in that industry. You know what I mean? It's like with Weinstein and Epstein. This power of, I can have you blacklisted. You'll never work again if you don't do what I say. I'm the gatekeeper. You know what I mean? You're under my control. You know what I mean? And that's exactly how Hef was. And all these types of guys are like that. And women as well. There are women who are predators who can be just as devious like that. You know what I mean? And you see it enough with these, you know, teachers, for God's sake, with the young male students. Like, it makes me, like, if I ever had kids, not want to send either my boy or my girl to a bloody public school for fear of the teachers being some kind of sicko. You know what I mean? I'd rather homeschool them, really, you know. And they can get their social interaction from the sports clubs that I'll send them to. But yeah, I wouldn't want my kids going to public school. Jesus. Yeah. Very sorry about your grandma. She must have been an amazing lady. Oh, thank you so much, Neat. Yeah, and everyone, and Diva, and everybody, and Val, and Coffee. Yeah, she was a very interesting woman. She, you know, she was very religious, right until the end. Had strong faith, and despite the cancer, she never let it like change who she was or her personality. She never lost a smile. And she was determined to never lose her smile, and she smiled to the end, and that's her legacy. Happy woman who cared about everybody, who put the needs and wishes of everybody before herself, and who was a great cook. You know what I mean? She was a great cook, and I'll really miss her and her warm nature, and she was typical Irish grandmother, you know what I mean? Irish Catholic grandmother. And, you know, I miss her a lot, and I don't think I've fully processed it all, you know, and I'm just kind of glad it happened before, just around the holiday time, because I was supposed to be going back and spending a little bit of time with my family anyway, and I will be now for the new year and for the funeral, and I'll be back in the good old USSA. USS. I nearly said USSR. That would have gotten me deported. The good old USSA. The good old USA. Jesus. I'll be back in the good old USA in about early January. So, yeah. I'm still here now, but I'll be leaving soon. But, yeah. Yeah, wow. I'm quite behind in track. Sounds great with that little amount of information. Exactly, neat. You know what I mean? You get like a cursory little insight about the Playboy Mansion. You know what I mean? And like I was saying, like when I was watching The Girls Next Door back in the 2000s. Yes, I was a child when I was watching this, so I wasn't the most clued up type of person in the world and mature. But I was like, oh my God, these women have such a great life. You know what I mean? Like they've got an amazing life. You know what I mean? How could, this is like, I was thinking like, if I was a woman, that's what I'd be freaking doing. You know what I mean? And I was just thinking like when I was watching it, like, oh my God, I'd love to be Hef's son. You know what I mean? And live there with him. You know what I mean? And why couldn't my mother have come with Hef? You know what I mean? Something like that. Which now, obviously, I'm glad that didn't happen. Obviously, I'd probably be a lot richer, but, I probably wouldn't have the same kind of values that I do and respect for women that I do. Because his son's, Marston's had his own issues, shall we say. Wow, yeah, we did 12-hour streams, coffee and skeletons. It was really, really out there. You know what I mean? Like, like a lot of people, like none of us in the true crime community do that anymore. You know what I mean? But Val did, and Val was able to keep talking about the cases for so long. You know what I mean? And the topics for so long, and that's a real skill. And when she gets a computer fixed and I'll sort it out and has more time, you know what I mean? Because she works a lot and really does a lot in life, you know what I mean? Has a lot on her plate, you know what I mean? When she has more time, hopefully she can join me and be a regular panel guest, and won't be making her do the 12-hour lives here. But, I think with her help, I can extend the time of them a little bit more than I usually do. I don't know if they were really 12, lol, but something like 7 or something. At points, they were that long, you know what I mean? Some of them were I feel were that long. I could be just overhyping it, but like, or you could just be being modest, you know what I mean? Because you are a very modest person, Val. But yeah, it felt like that, you know what I mean? That they were so long, and but yeah, it's because you'd always pick topics that that you did the research on, you know what I mean? Like people, like you can tell when someone's just going over like notes that they've done like at the last minute and that they're not a total expert on the topic. By just hearing them, but with you'd be able to go through so much with like, so much enthusiasm for so long, you know what I mean? And you'd keep people watching, and that's such a skill, you know what I mean? And the true crime world would very much like you back. We miss you. 12 hours, holy moly. Oh, that'd be great. Any time that's good for you, no rush, Val, no rush at all. But yeah, I'm sure everyone in the chat and me in particular would absolutely love that. We could maybe get Amber to come on as well and panel up with Amber, and that would be great, because I think the last time you were on a panel was with Amber, you know what I mean? And I remember that. Could you imagine being a small town girl and coming to the city and seeing the Playboy Mansion, how amazingly ridiculous, humongous it was? Yeah, like all the girls on the Girls Next Door were girls from small towns, you know what I mean? Like Holly was born in freaking Alaska, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't get more rural than that. She was born in Alaska and then grew up in Oregon, you know what I mean? And then moved to Oregon and rural as well, you know what I mean? Like both small towns where she grew up, you know what I mean? So like she was like you know, a small town girl, and so was Bridget, you know what I mean? I'm not entirely sure where Bridget comes from, but I know it wasn't a big city. So like all the girls on that show, they were all from Nowheresville basically. And yeah, like to be overwhelmed by that, you know what I mean? It's you know, it's a tale as old as Hollywood itself, you know what I mean? You know, naive girl with talent comes to the big city and then gets, you know, taken under the wing of an experienced director or photographer, and then, you know, she gets taken advantage of, and then she's no longer of use to them anymore, and then she's thrown away and you don't hear about her anymore. And that's the tragedy. I don't like that. I don't want that anymore. These women are not going to be forgotten about and tossed aside anymore, like with the women who were victimized in Playboy. I'm good night, Jane and chat. Happy holidays. Oh, you're going to get off to sleep now. Good night, Diva girl. Hope you have sweet dreams, and you get everything you want for holidays. And same with you, Neat. I hope you both you and Diva have a nice evening, you know, and a wonderful Christmas and holidays to you and all your families. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I know we started late and everything. It wasn't sleep, but yeah, no worries at all. Yeah, glad you could all make it. It means a lot. Coffee, yes, I was raised in a very small town too, so it would have blown my socks off. Lol, I wouldn't have been it. I would have been disowned though if I was ever in it. So it wasn't ever in the cards for me. Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of women who I think, you know, probably like wish they could have done it, and now hearing all the stories about Playboy, feel a lot better that they didn't, you know what I mean? So it is interesting. But yeah, I got into a bit of a tangent, but back to what I was saying earlier about Stephanie Adams, who was a Playboy playmate who was in the film Scarface. She was an extra. She played the blonde girl who was standing near the car, you know, before Tony's going to the deal with the Colombians, you know, with the chainsaw and all that. And Dorothy Adams, she had like this crazed like meltdown on set, like the scene with the chainsaws. She was like broke down, started crying in hysterics, and then some of the cast and crew went over to her and like, well, what's the matter? What's the matter? And it's not real, you know. And she was just like, oh, I know it's not real, but it reminds me of something I've seen. I've seen too much. They're gonna come and get me. You know what I mean? And like people may just thought she was mentally ill at the time. And but she'd been in Playboy. She'd been to the mansion. She knew Hefner. She was one of the higher profile ones. So, but just seeing blood and the simulation of a murder set her off, and she was like triggered something in her. You know what I mean? And I was talking earlier about Sandra Theodore, who has been a wealth of knowledge, and I can't thank her enough for her interviews that she did for the Dark Side of Playboy series. It must have taken a lot out of her to be able to do that. She says that Hef would talk about viewing snuff films of women being killed on camera, beaten on camera, brutalized on camera. So my thought is that she had seen one of these with Hef and seen this, you know, simulation of a murder, triggered her and freaked her out. You know what I mean? And snuff is something that's, you know, a lot of people say It isn't real. You know what I mean? Of course it's real. If you can conceive it, it's real. And I already know it's real. I did a live years ago about the Moors murders, and those are a killer couple that kidnapped and molested and killed kids, a man and a woman, in the 60s in Britain. And they recorded a lot of this type of torture and on audio recording. So in a sense, there already was snuff tapes. Yes, the Moors murders. Exactly. Yeah, so there already was snuff tapes back even then. They've been going a long time. It's just the media likes to downplay it because certain people don't want you to believe that they are real. Because if you believe they're real, then you might want to like look into them and find out who's doing them and who's making them, and where they come from, and put a stop to it. You know what I mean? And then you realize that, oh wait, people who like this type of thing a lot of the time are very rich and powerful, and they don't want their thing being ruined. So they'll put money into it so that the media go, oh, it's just a myth. There's no such thing. Of course there are snuff films. If there's people who commit murder and who can, it's people who take videos of child abuse, for God's sake. Of course there's going to be people who take videos of murders. You know what I mean? Like all these cartel videos that were always on Live Leak. You know what I mean? To say that there's no such thing as snuff is the biggest lie in the world. It's like people who try and like downplay child abuse. You know what I mean? A lot of the times they probably are abusers themselves. But yeah, it's Hefner would have had access to that type of thing because of his money, status, and his, being known as quite a sexual predator. You know what I mean? Like the people who would market that type of thing or be selling it or producing it would know that he would be the type of person to go to try and sell it. So my view is that Adams, when they were filming Scarface, was triggered by that because of something that Hugh Hefner had shown her. And after leaving the film, although her scene was shot, she like moved back in with her mother and her dad, and she was just telling her mother, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be killed. I know too much. I'm going to be killed. And when her mother was asking, like, what do you know? What happened? She's like, I just can't tell you. It's just too awful. I don't want to relive it again. It's just too awful. You'll not believe me anyway. And then she went missing and she was never seen again. And I think that she was murdered at the ordering of Hugh Hefner, because I think that she did know too much. And I think he was worried about that. And I think that that's the one out of all the Playboy murders that you can put onto him directly. The others, spouses, obsessed fans, but this one, it all points towards him. And I'm not going to just forget about Stephanie Adams, because to me, she had a mother, she had children. No, she didn't have children. She was a child, but like she was a woman. You know what I mean? She had rights. She deserves. Her family deserve closure. You know what I mean? And I think that it all points to that being the case. Like, and it's easy to just gaslight her and say she was mentally ill, but what we know about Hef, what others have said, yeah, maybe she was mentally ill as a result of being traumatized, but it doesn't mean that what she was saying wasn't true. Doesn't mean that she wasn't under threat. You know what I mean? I don't believe in gaslighting. And that's what gaslighting is, sadly. And women have been gaslit, and victims of abuse in general have been gaslit for too long. I think it's time we start listening to these people instead of just dismissing them as being mentally ill and troubled, for God's sake. Especially when what they're saying lines up with what other people have said. But I'm pretty sure. I'm sure he eventually would get bored and had to push things to the limit. You're right. That what you're all saying is it's a drug. It's like a drug. You know what I mean? Like, it's like people who are degenerate drug users. You know what I mean? Like when I was really into it, drugs, like I'd be like, oh, weed isn't enough. LSD isn't enough. I need something better. I need something stronger. You know what I mean? I need something that's going to take me to the new level because I've done all these other lesser drugs and it ain't doing it for me anymore. I need something more. You know what I mean? Like, so from my perspective, I can completely, not the whole sexual predator side of things, but being addicted to something that isn't good for you and then constantly needing it to be more and more and more. I get that thinking very well. So yeah, you're completely right. It's like with these predators, these people who have these deviations, they have to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse till it ends up that the only thing that gets them off is watching videos of women being beaten to death and killed. You know what I mean? Like that's what he was watching. Sandra Theodore says it. Other people say it, that he was watching this shit and showing it to women. And I think at the same time, it was a message to say, look, if you don't keep in line, you could easily end up in one of these films too. You know what I mean? As a kind of like, watch out, ladies. You know, which is terrific. You know what I mean? It's terrifying. Like, I can't imagine how fucking scared they must have been. Like, no wonder Stephanie was terrified of, you know, and was triggered by all that and had that, you know, meltdown because she was scared of Hugh Hefner. You know what I mean? Because the guy was a monster. The guy was a monster. You know, that image of all this nice old man or whatever, and like, oh my god, you know, the stuff I've heard from doing this research is just insane. It's some of the most insane stuff ever. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's there's another there's another murder victim of Playboy, who I was talking to you earlier about, the one from the Playboy Club in London. Another member of the Playboy Club in London was killed and strangled to death as well. And that's, to me, I think that is also a sign of something that the brand himself could have been, or Hef could have been connected to, because he was always getting around and going to these other clubs and checking in on them and seeing the women. And, you know, if not Hef, maybe, like I said, that like another VIP client, you know what I mean? But yeah, the gaslighting, similar to what happened to Virginia Giuffre. Like, I completely agree, you know, because she was accusing Andrew and all these powerful people, and that people don't want to think badly of. They just want to put up as some kind of like beacon of truth and some kind of hero. You know, they want to attack and gaslight because, you know, it's easier for them to attack the woman than it is to believe her, because then they'd have to look at themselves and analyze how they view the world, and that's easy. That's too hard for some people, which is pathetic. It's harder to be Virginia and women like her who've been through rape and sexual assault and human trafficking, you know, which is a form of modern slavery. And the gaslighting, exactly. His image was always a nice, maybe a pervy old gentleman. Exactly, and the pervy side of it was always like in good fun. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of, you know, it's oh, look at him. He's an older guy still getting his rocks off. God love him. You know what I mean? Like, he was the lovable, like, and that was the image. He was a lovable perv, basically. That's the image he was trying to create for himself, and also the image that he like valued women's rights and stuff like that, which he didn't at all. He used to have a thing called Pig Night at the house, which Sandra Theodore. Basically, most of this is I'm getting from Sandra Theodore's interviews with the secrets of Playboy, but all of this has been corroborated by other playmates who said that this shit kept happening like years and years later. I'll be right back. Great coffee and skeletons take your time. I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, yeah, it's crazy. You know what I mean? That that image lasted so long and was so authentic. You know what I mean? But that's what predators do. They create an image for themselves that excuses or allows their behavior, or that if you heard about it, you dismiss it or make excuses for it. You know what I mean? Like this is fairly typical predator behavior. You know what I mean? And that's what he was doing. But yeah, they had pig night, like I was saying, and Sandra Theodore was talking about this happening in the 70s, but this happened right up until the 2000s, and this is where they'd get like sex workers. She would get sex workers to come in who were not, high-end escorts, so to speak, like who were like street prostitutes, basically, who a lot of them had drug addictions and were charging very little money. Like he'd bring them in, and get their hair done nice, and welcome back. Pig night. Oh my god, yeah, it's really horrific. They get the women who are like poor prostitutes, basically, in like Skid Row and other, in Compton and those type of places, to come, and like they treat them nicely, give them a pig night. I'm talking about it. Pig night is when like Hef would get like cheap prostitutes, so like not escorts, like not high-end escorts, like cheap prostitutes from like Compton and other like lower income parts of LA, and would get them treated nicely, their hair done, and then like they'd be checked for STDs. The ones that had them would be asked to leave. But the ones that didn't, Hef and his friends would just have sex with them, and this type of sex would be like degrading, really humiliating, sadistic type of sex. You know what I mean? And they were just there to be used and abused. You know what I mean? And obviously they were paid for it, whatever, but it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it right what was done to them. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was evil, you know what I mean? It was evil, and they'd laugh at them and then insult their appearances. And these women, like you say, Tash, they were vulnerable. They were drug addicts. They'd been abused themselves. They were all very young. You know what I mean? Like all these people who go, oh, well, they took the money. You know what I mean? Like people clearly don't understand like abuse and the cycle of it, and what that can do to somebody's mind. And I think that as a society, we're becoming more wise to the effects of childhood abuse and other things like that, and drug addiction, and having more like understanding for people, and not like just condemning the wrong people. You know what I mean? Like, don't condemn the prostitutes. You know what I mean? Condemn Hef and his buddies who abused them, who took advantage of them, who beat them up, who laughed at them, who mocked them, and it makes it okay because he gave them money. No, it doesn't. It's not right at all. A kind name for bringing someone in the most vulnerable. Yeah, exactly. Type of person he was, a monster. So heartbreaking. I couldn't agree more. Condemning the wrong people. Exactly. You know what I mean? And all this, Playboy's about lifting up women and all that. No, it's about keeping them in chains. That's the real story of Playboy. Is convincing women that, that they're breaking free from the chains of being a nuclear housewife or whatever, which, that isn't for everybody. And not every woman is destined to be a fucking housewife and a mother and do all that. Your destiny is yours to figure out. You know what I mean? It can't be predetermined for you. But what happened was women traded those chains for another set of chains in the fucking Playboy mansion. You know what I mean? So really, it wasn't much different, other than they have more of a glitz and glamour lifestyle, but with a hell of a lot more trauma. It really does make him the pig. Absolutely, they're the pigs. Him and his weird friends are the pigs. Treating women like that, and just it's been so, you know, horrific, you know what I mean? And just callous, with no empathy, no remorse, no nothing. And he, like I said earlier, I believe, I'm no psychiatrist, but I believe that his pathology, his abuse towards women, his looking down on women so much, was all started from him being cheated on in his first marriage, and him like being a late bloomer, so to speak, when it comes to sex. And, you know, just because a woman treats you bad doesn't mean every woman deserves hell. What kind of thinking is that? You know what I mean? Like, that's the type of stupid thinking that we've got here. And incel culture and femcel culture and all this kind of shit, we're just hating the other gender, is all part of the system's plan for divide and conquer, to divide us against each other. Don't paint everybody with the same brush when it comes to anything. Everybody's an individual. There's good men, there's good women. You know what I mean? And to just assume that they're all the same, like he did, clearly shows you what an idiot he was. You know, and it shows you how weak he was. You know, he's pathetic. You know, swap their rusty trains for a newer, tighter ones. Exactly. That's exactly how I see it. And you know, his behavior and his way of dealing with things never changed. It's consistent. You know, and about the drugging and the sexual assaults. That's believed to have happened not just in the 70s, but as recently as the 2000s. There's playmates from that time who said, like in the 90s and the 2000s, that same type of stuff happened, you know. And one woman that was there, that was on The Girls Next Door, but she wasn't like a main cast member. She was just like guest starring on it, and she's friends with Bridget and Holly, but she has her own YouTube channel as well. She doesn't really talk much about Playboy, but she does like occasionally talk about it. Stacey Burke. She was there, and she was roommates with a woman called Jordan, aka Katie Price. And now people from the UK will be a lot more familiar with Katie Price than people in America. But Katie Price was like a glamour girl, was a lads mags girl, as people in the UK would say. Like, that's like, you know, nudie mags, basically, like that. She was like the woman for that in the UK for like a time in the 90s, and then she was invited to go to Playboy, and she was at the mansion for a while. But Stacey Burke was like saying on her YouTube that you know, Jordan, or Katie Price, was her roommate, and Katie Price was one of the women there who were like dead set not having sex with Hef. You know, which you know shows they all some of them did and some of them didn't. But she said, Stacey Burke said one on her YouTube channel that one night she came in from like a pictorial or from being out somewhere, and into the room that she shared with Katie, and she found Katie just like passed out on the ground, like she'd been drugged. You know what I mean? And she said that Katie Price like was a drinker, sure, but like she never seen her like do any drugs before. And from her saying that, I think that that's an example of where Hef may have given her the old leg openers, as he'd called them, and leg openers, as he called them, which were his quaaludes, and then took advantage of Paul Casey, and then left her there, you know, and then left her for Stacey to find her. And that Stacey didn't outright say she thinks that that's what happened, but I can deduce that's probably what happened based on all the stuff we've heard from Sandra Theodore and all the other guests over the years. You know what I mean, and former housemates. You know, it really is messed up that was allowed to carry on for so long, that he was allowed to blatantly drug and essay women, and he was never charged. He was never interviewed by the police. You know what I mean? Like, I really like to believe that as a society, there can't be any more Hugh Hefners. You know what I mean? Like we've moved on from that point, but I still think that there are people in our world who are untouchable, and we have to do something about it. You know what I mean? Like we have to make it so that everyone's held equally accountable if they do something wrong. You know what I mean? Money and background shouldn't be a way that people can get out of shit. You know what I mean? Or friends, or who their friends are. You know what I mean? And this all feeds into Epstein and Weinstein and Me Too and all that. You know what I mean? It's all connected. You know, we can't put these people on pedestals anymore. We just can't. You know, it's it's not right, and this is what it leads to. It leads to people thinking they're untouchable, and going around doing whatever the hell they like, you know, and it's terrible. They're starting to slowly become touchable. I agree. You know, it's like the fall of some. It's like breaking down the barriers. You know what I mean? Like once one falls, others fall. The pillars, you know, one will fall, the other falls. You know, one after the other. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Diddy. I think I think it's very similar to the Hugh Hefner situation. Very similar. Diddy was a voyeur. He liked to film people having sex without their knowledge and watch it as blackmail material, but he also liked the feeling of power he got from that sexually. You know what I mean? And I think that was the same with Hefner. And so I think that their pathologies were very similar. You know what I mean? I think that as people, they were very similar. Still have a long way to go, but I think we are beginning to move ever so slightly in the right direction. I agree, Tash. I think that with Weinstein and Epstein, and like us going back and re-examining how we've looked at certain people in our culture and made excuses for certain celebrities in the past who we know have done fucked up shit. Like Bill Wyman, for example, from the Rolling Stones. He openly admits that he was having sex with his ex-wife when she was 14. You know what I mean? And no one really gave a shit about that back then. You know what I mean? And like Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old niece. You know what I mean? So like, and he was still allowed to be a star. And you got all this stuff with Elvis and Priscilla, and I can keep going on. You know what I mean? We can't put people on a pedestal anymore just because we like them. It's something we need to do, but I am right. Half of those men were dating minors, exactly. In the 60s and the 50s. It's like they make this old adage of, oh, it was a different time. No, it was a different time, but the same rules and values should apply. You know what I mean? I don't think ever in our society was it ever acceptable to have sex with kids. You know what I mean? Never in America's history was it ever allowed or acceptable to have sex with children, which is what they were doing. They were having sex with children. Call them groupies, call them whatever the fuck you like. They were still kids. You know what I mean? And I would call them groomed. You know what I mean? Yes, I learned of the lead singer of the Lost Prophets too, and my jaw was on the ground. Not sure if you're familiar, but yes, Ian Watkins. Yeah, I only ever heard about him after he was convicted, because that type of music that he made was never my type of thing. But when I was in the UK when the story broke, and you couldn't escape it because of just how awful it was. And I'm not going to do a live on him just because of how bad it is. The case is, it's so sick. I don't even want to, talk about it too much in detail. But yeah, brief overview is that he had fans, and he took advantage of those fans in the worst possible way. He had young fans who were young girls, and he took advantage of them. And also he had fans who were young mothers as well, and he took advantage of their very young children, like babies. I'm talking here. And and thankfully that guy was dispatched. He was killed in prison not too long ago. And it's people like him that make me wish the UK still had the death penalty, because it shouldn't be up to people who are saving time in prison to kill such a person. such a person should be killed by the state. If you do those things to a child, you need to die, as far as I'm concerned. If you do those things to a woman or a man or anyone, if you do any kind of sexual assault, I think you need to die. I don't think that there's any coming back from that. It's the worst. It's one of the worst crimes you can commit. It's just, to me, it's just as bad as murder, if not worse in some cases. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's that case is horrific, really horrific, and it doesn't surprise me that more don't talk about it on YouTube because of just how horrific it is. Yes, Coffee. I listened to a couple of songs, but I'm in the US and I heard of his passing first, and then the sick shit that followed, and I was sick to my stomach. The innocent babies too. Yeah. You and me both, Jay. Not a loss, but the damage he inflicted on so many, gut-wrenching. Yeah. He was a particularly bad one, you know what I mean? And he makes Hugh Hefner look like a fucking saint, if that was possible. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's as dark as you can get. But yeah, all of these guys are really fucked up, and society creates them. Society enables them. There will be more of them, like I say, if we don't analyze the fact that we put people on this untouchable pedestal. You know what I mean? It's something that we as a society, as a people, and the media play into this too, have to address, and it's really pertinent that we do that. I'm not going to be going on for too much longer because we're nearly at the 2-hour mark, and I don't want to keep you up all night. But thank you for everyone who's been here for the duration of it. It's not been an easy live, and it was pretty interrupted by my Wi-Fi issues, and it kind of sent me into a bit of a spiral. But I'm okay, and I hope I managed to get all the information I got together out in a good way. But yeah, I'll be starting to wrap it up soon. But I think it's important to look at what the Playboy playmates who managed to get away from Hefner have managed to achieve after Playboy. Obviously Jenny McCarthy has nothing but nice things to say about Hugh Hefner and Playboy, but she went on to Hollywood and did good things, and maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not gonna make any assumptions, but I think maybe. But obviously you've got Holly Madison, who's gone on to have her Moulin Rouge show that she presented in Las Vegas, a Moulin Rouge style show in Las Vegas, which was a very well-respected burlesque show, like Dita Von Teese style, and her and Bridget have their podcast that they do together. And oh my God, yes, Jenny McCarthy about Justin Bieber. Yeah, and that awards ceremony where you talk about women can be predators too. Oh my God, she was all over him, kissing him, and like making all kind of comments towards him. And he said, "I feel molested. I feel violated right now." You know what I mean? And saying it as a joke, but you can tell he wasn't comfortable with the way she was being all handsy with him. You know what I mean? And but like if that was another way around, if that was like a group. Oh, hi, Amy. Glad you could join us. We're not going to be going on for too much longer, but glad you could make it towards the end, and I hope you can catch the replay of what you missed. But yeah, it's like for Justin, it was awful. People were laughing at him and acting like, oh, he was all happy about it, and it was great. You know what I mean? And but no, like men and boys can be victims of women too, and of other men, and of men. You know what I mean? Like because you're a man, and like you might, or a teen boy, you know what I mean? Like, because you might be having thoughts about like women, you know what I mean, and things like that. It doesn't mean that a grown woman should just go and touch you up, you know what I mean? Like, That's not okay. That's damaging. And poor Justin, I don't think it was just Jenny McCarthy that was doing that. I think a lot of people were doing horrible things to Justin. And I think that the way he is now is, consistent with that. And I just hope that he can get away from the spotlight and one day, if he feels able to, speak his truth. You know what I mean? Because I think that he was treated awfully by the industry, and his tale is one that's too common, too common at all. But yeah, so many women who have been on Playboy or in Playboy who went through that trauma have managed to come through it and made a great life for themselves. Kendra is selling real estate now, who was on The Girls Next Door, like a high-end realtor, so she's doing really great. And there's bunch of different former playmates that are, in media, you know what I mean, doing podcasts, presenting things. And obviously Holly did a lot for the Playboy Murders TV series that they did about other playmates that had been killed or died in mysterious situations. So if you're interested about wanting to watch like where I got my info on and insight from, I can give it you. So The Dark Side of Playboy, the Playboy Murders, and also I watched America's Book of Secrets, which is a really interesting series that did an episode on the Playboy Mansion before Hef died and before all the stuff came out. But it is an interesting episode to watch because it gives you like a tour of the mansion and like information about the secret rooms that they have. But one last thing to talk about before I wrap. It's interesting to note that Hugh Hefner's son had his own kind of issues with his. Holly made huge waves and took a ton of flack for it. I applaud her. Exactly, Holly is a really smart woman, and she spent most of her life in a shell, and thinking that she was weird and that she didn't have much to offer people. And then she realized like years later she was diagnosed with autism, and it made a lot more sense in her life as to why people treated her the way she was treated, like always taken advantage of, and not, people didn't treat her the way she treated them, and like she didn't understand why people would be so manipulative and not have pure of heart and have good intentions all the time, which is typical of someone who has autism or a spectrum disease or a spectrum disorder of that type of thing. But yeah, Holly realized that in later life, and then like it helped her, have her voice and take her power back. And as a result of that, that's what motivated her to write her book, to do the podcast with Bridget, and to speak about it. And like Jenny McCarthy attacked her. A lot of other playmates attacked her when her book came out, talking about the dark side of Hef, how Hef would, tell her she was ugly. You know what I mean? When if you see pictures of Holly Madison is certainly not ugly. None of those women are ugly, ever. You know what I mean? Absolutely not. So Hef was an ugly old bastard. You know what I mean? And for him to call her ugly, you know what I mean? You try looking in the mirror. You know what I mean? But yeah, and he would always make comments to the girls about their weight. You know what I mean? So I'm surprised that like none of them, I'm assuming probably a lot of them developed eating disorders that they probably had to deal with because of Hef constantly being on to them about body and things like that. Has Bridget talked about this type of thing? Well, Bridget has talked about the fact that like she was obviously there with Holly and all the other girls, and she didn't like the control elements of being at the mansion. You know what I mean? She didn't like the curfews, the lack of money, the lack of ability to earn from other places. But yeah, Bridget was different because she wasn't like the main girlfriend, but I'm sure like she probably, like, I think she's talked about how she didn't enjoy the sex with Hef. You know what I mean? And the way Hef could be to her, because Hef could be kind of shitty to her, but as well, like all of them, and like she didn't like how Hef was like seemingly eyeing up Anastasia, who was Bridget's sister, younger sister. Like, so if you watch that, you know that Anastasia would occasionally come to the mansion and hang out because she was at UCLA when the series was going on. So she'd occasionally stop by and hang out and say hi to everybody. But yeah, Bridget, like was saying, like she always thought that Hef had his eyes on Anastasia, and she was like, no way you're gonna get my sister. Like, fuck you. You know what I mean? It's like that, Bridget has spoken about like her not liking Hef, but like I said, like she had that Holly had more of the closeness because she was the main girlfriend, and like Sandra Theodore was the main girlfriend. So it's like all this shit tends to come from the main girlfriends, you know what I mean? Because they tend to bear the brunt of all this, you know what I mean? And the other women are there to kind of, you know, be his like side women and to engage in the orgies that he'd have, you know what I mean? And yeah, you know, like a lot of these women like didn't like want to have group sex, you know what I mean, and see each other having sex with him or have sex with Hef, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of coercion in that, and it's like, ugh, who would enjoy that? No thanks. Exactly, you know, Hef's was an old man, and I'm glad that, you know, I'm glad that women now can, or men, or whoever want to do it, can you know, be models and not have to have these weird gatekeepers anymore. Accessories, basically. Absolutely. He never saw them as people, and I don't think he ever tried to like get to know Holly, Bridget, or Kendra, or any of his other girlfriends or the playmates as women, as people. You know what I mean? Like, get beyond the, you know, the image of them and what they look like. You just wanted them as Barbie girls, you know what I mean? Makes sense. He went with a woman named Barbie Benton, you know what I mean? I think that's what he wanted, you know what I mean? Like dolls, essentially, women without personalities that would just not question him, and like Stepford Wives type of shit, you know what I mean? Like, and any man that would want that is a very shallow and weak man. You know, I would never want that. You know what I mean? That isn't a relationship. That's slavery. You know what I mean? That isn't normal, and that isn't love. You know what I mean? And I don't think he ever knew what love is or love was. You know what I mean? Or he did, but he didn't like the idea of it. And that's where I'll end, basically, because that basically says it all. But thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for being with us as we got through all this. I'm thankful that you all made it, despite me starting late, and you're all so interactive and good in chat. You know, I really appreciate it, and happy holidays to you all. And I'll be doing another live in the coming days about the new Epstein. Obviously, I've been covering Epstein. We'll be doing the Epstein files, the leaks, all the celebrities and the people of note who will be in that. And how a lot of it's been redacted by Pam Bondi, and how a lot of people, me included, are not very happy about that. But yeah, happy holidays to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. And I'll see you in a few days. I'm thinking 26th is when I will be live again for Epstein, and I promise you it will be on the time I say it will be, and there'll be no Wi-Fi issues. I'll make sure of it. I'll try and keep the gremlins away. But yeah, thank you so much again for everyone for joining us. And I know these lives can be difficult topics to discuss, but I'm just glad to have you all here with us to make it easier. And like I said, the Epstein live will be my next one, and then hopefully after that, I'm probably before the new year, I'm gonna like have maybe a Christmas or holiday. I shouldn't say Christmas because I'm not a Christian, you know what I mean? And I have a lot of viewers who aren't. So it's a holiday special for all the holidays, for all the people of all the faiths in the world can come before New Year's Eve, I think, around New Year's Eve. And I'll do like a fun live where we talk about like, you know, fun stuff that isn't like movies, music, you know what I mean? Funny conspiracy theories that are not dark, you know what I mean? Like silly things that we can have a laugh about, because I think it's important to have balance in life, and it's important to have balance on the channel, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't want to constantly hear about dark shit all the time, you know what I mean? I do have a morbid curiosity but enough is enough at some points. You know what I mean? So next live will be obviously on Epstein, so difficult topic, obviously. And then the live after that, before New Year, I'll have a nice Christmas live where we do like movie trivia, talk about funny conspiracy theories or whatever, and hopefully get quite a few panel guests on and have like a panel party, and as a good way to end off the year with a good laugh. Exactly, coffee and skeletons. So happy holidays, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I'll see you. Thank you very much for joining us.